She had been planning this day since she was a child. Not in the way that girls in other circumstances plan such things, not with any expectation of luxury or ceremony or choice. She had planned it the way every woman in her village planned it. Quietly, practically, with the kind of hope that survives only because it refuses to look too far ahead. The dress was simple. The food was whatever the harvest had allowed. The man she was marrying was someone she had known her whole life, a farmer, a laborer, someone who worked the same fields she had worked since she could walk. By the standards of her world, this was a good day. This was everything a woman in her position could reasonably expect. The village celebrated. There was music. There was laughter. Children ran between the legs of adults. The older women watched with expressions that were warm and tired at the same time. And then, as the evening darkened and the celebration began to wind down, someone came to the door. Not her husband, the Lord's man. And everyone in that room already knew what it meant. In medieval Europe, across vast stretches of land from France to Scotland to the Spanish territories, the lord of the estate held a claim that went beyond taxes, beyond labor, beyond the grain stored in his granary. He held a claim over the night a peasant woman spent with her new husband, before the marriage was consummated, before the couple was left alone. The lord or his appointed representative was understood to have first access. It was called the right of the first night. And for centuries, in village after village, on estate after estate, it was simply the way things were. No one asked the woman. No one needed to. To understand how this was possible, you have to understand what a peasant woman was. Legally in this world, she was not a citizen. She was not a free person in any recognized sense. She was attached to the land the same way a fence post is attached to the land. She was part of the estate's value. When her lord looked at his property, she was included in that calculation. Her labor belonged to him. Her children's labor would belong to him. And under the customs that governed dozens of estates across Europe, her body on her wedding night was considered, in some formal sense, part of what he was owed. This was not hidden. It was not spoken of in whispers among the nobility as something shameful or excessive. It was written into estate customs the way harvest schedules were written as a matter of routine administration. A line in the ledger. A custom passed from one lord to the next. The whale and itself was passed through inheritance, through assumption, through the simple repetition of power unchallenged long enough to become tradition. The wedding celebrations would continue outside. She would be escorted, or she would go alone, or she would simply be brought. The details varied by region, by lord, by how much cruelty or indifference or casual entitlement the man in the manor house happened to carry into the evening. Some lords exercised the right themselves, arriving without ceremony, without explanation, because none was required. Others sent us to a representative, as though the act of delegation made the claim more orderly. In certain estates, across certain generations, the custom had softened into a fee. The husband could pay to have the night left undisturbed. But paying required money, and peasants, by definition, rarely had enough of it. So the night unfolded the way it unfolded. And by morning, the village moved on. The couple began their life together. The lord returned to his manor, and the woman carried whatever she carried in silence, because there was no other option. There was no authority she could appeal to, no court that recognized her standing, no language in the legal system of her world that included her perspective on what had occurred. The church objected repeatedly, in writing, in council after council across multiple centuries. Bishops condemned the practice. Reformers named it as an abuse. But the church's written objection and the Lord's physical behavior occupied two entirely separate worlds. In the village, on the estate, on the night in question, the Lord's word was the only law that existed, and the Lord had not asked the church. Think about what that silence cost. A woman who had grown up watching this happen to the women around her, to her mother, to her older sister, to the neighbor whose wedding she had attended 3 summers ago, standing in the same field, hearing the same music. She had understood from childhood that her wedding night was not entirely hers to give. She did not need to be told directly. It was simply the knowledge that lived in the village past between women in glances and pauses and the particular way older women held younger ones when there were no words adequate to the situation. She dressed on her wedding morning carrying that knowledge. She stood beside the man she was marrying carrying that knowledge. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, and she ate when food was placed in front of her, and she danced when the music called for dancing. And underneath all of it, in the part of her that no celebration could fully reach, she waited, because that was what the women in her village had always done. They waited, they endured, and then they continued. That knowledge shaped everything. The way she moved through her own wedding day, the way her husband looked at her, or could not look at her, the way the older women in the village offered comfort they could not fully name because naming it would require acknowledging it directly. And acknowledging it directly was a thing this world had decided not to do. The rite of the first night was not only an act, it was an atmosphere. It was a permanent condition of powerlessness that every woman on that estate breathed in from the day she was old enough to understand it. It did not begin on her wedding night. It began the first time she watched it happen to someone else and understood, without being told, that her turn would come. And the Lord understood this too. That is perhaps the darkest element of the entire system. The physical act, wherever and whenever it occurred, was not the full extent of the harm. The harm was structural. It was the knowledge that he could. It was the fact that his claim existed, whether he chose to exercise it personally or not, whether he sent a man, accepted a payment, or simply let the threat of his presence reshape the night from a distance. The woman could never be entirely certain, in the days and weeks approaching her wedding, which version of his power she would encounter. The uncertainty itself was the instrument. The claim itself was the control. Power does not need to be exercised every time to be felt every day. The Lord did not need to appear at every door to ensure that every woman on his estate knew he could. The custom's existence was enough. It moved through the village the way cold moves through a house with a broken window, not always visible, but always present, always shaping the way people moved and spoke and planned and hoped. By the later medieval period, on many estates, the practice had shifted primarily into financial territory. Husbands paid fees, lords accepted payment. The physical act, in those cases, was commuted into a transaction. But commuting a right into money does not erase the right. It reframes it. It makes it more convenient for the man collecting it and slightly less visible to anyone observing from a distance. The violence becomes administrative. A harm becomes a line item. And not every husband could pay. And not every lord was willing to accept payment when something else was available. This is the pivot. The claim was the crime. Not only the nights it was exercised. Not only the specific women who were brought to a specific room in a specific manner on a specific evening. The claim itself, the legal existence of this right. The fact that it was written, normalized, inherited, and accepted as a feature of the world rather than a violation of it, that was the violence. Every peasant woman on every estate where this custom existed lived inside that violence every single day. The wedding night was simply the moment it stopped being abstract. What is certain is this: it happened. Across generations, across countries, across centuries of European and feudal history, lords exercised power over peasant women on their wedding nights. Some did it physically, some did it financially. Some did it through the sheer gravitational weight of a claim that no one in the village had the power to refuse. The form varied, the structure did not. What is also certain is that none of the women who lived through were asked to give their account. The records were kept by the men who benefited from the system. The laws were written by men who served those men. The women who endured it left no documents, no formal testimonies, no named complaints in any surviving archive. They left only the silence. And the silence, if you know how to read it, is the loudest thing in the historical record. It does not mean nothing happened. It means the world they lived in was not built to record what happened to them. The claim was the crime, and the crime lasted for centuries. If this kind of dark, unfiltered history is what you come here for, the stories that were never meant to be remembered, the crimes that were considered normal, then subscribe to Silent Evidence. Drop a comment below with the next case you want uncovered. The archive runs deep, and most of it has never been told.